A day in the life of Nurse Sarah. Nurse Sarah stood in front of her mirror, adjusting the white cap on her head. She let out a small sigh, knowing that it would be another long and tiring day. But despite the exhaustion that often accompanied her job, Sarah always felt a sense of pride and purpose as she prepared for work. The hospital was like her second home, and the people there were not just patients, but individuals who relied on her care, support, and compassion. She had been a nurse for nearly 5 years now, and every day brought new challenges and new rewards. Chapter 1: Morning Calm. Sarah's alarm rang at 5 a.m. sharp. She quickly turned it off, not wanting to disturb her husband, who was still asleep beside her. She rubbed her eyes and stretched, feeling the stiffness in her muscles from the previous day. It was still dark outside, and the world seemed peaceful and quiet. But Sarah knew that the hospital would soon be bustling with activity. After a quick shower, Sarah dressed in her uniform, a light blue scrub set that always made her feel both professional and comfortable. She tied her hair into a neat bun and placed her white nursing cap carefully on top. Her reflection in the mirror showed a young woman with tired eyes, but a determined spirit. She couldn't help but smile. Grabbing her coffee and a small piece of toast, Sarah left her house and headed to the hospital. It was only a short drive, but in those few minutes, she mentally prepared herself for the day ahead. She never knew what to expect. Some days were relatively calm, while others were chaotic from the start. No matter what the day brought, she knew that her role was essential. Being a nurse wasn't just about performing tasks or following procedures, it was about being there for people during some of the most vulnerable moments of their lives. As she pulled into the parking lot of St. Mary's Hospital, Sarah took a deep breath. The tall building, with its bright lights and buzzing energy, always gave her a sense of purpose. She wasn't just coming to a job, she was coming to help people, to make a difference. Chapter 2: The beginning of the shift. Sarah walked through the sliding doors of the hospital, greeted by the familiar sounds of beeping machines, footsteps rushing by, and the soft murmur of voices. She checked in at the front desk, where the night nurse handed her the patient list for the day. "Morning, Sarah." The receptionist, Jill, greeted her with a warm smile. "Ready for another busy day?" Sarah chuckled. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied. She scanned the list of patients, noticing a few familiar names along with some new ones. The first part of her day was always about getting a sense of what was going on in the ward. She made her way to the nurses' station, where her colleagues were already starting their shifts. Together, they reviewed the overnight reports, talked about the patients who needed special attention, and discussed any potential emergencies. Sarah had a full caseload today, 8 patients to monitor and care for. Each patient had different needs. Some were recovering from surgery, Others were dealing with chronic illnesses. And a few were in for routine checkups and treatments. Her mind quickly switched to work mode as she grabbed her chart and headed to the first room. Chapter 3: Checking on Patients. Her first stop was room 201. Inside was Mr. Stevens, an elderly man recovering from hip surgery. He had been in the hospital for about a week and was doing well, but he still needed help with daily tasks like getting out of bed and walking. Sarah knocked gently before entering. "Good morning, Mr. Stevens," she said with a bright smile. "How are you feeling today?" Mr. Stevens, a kind-hearted man in his late 70s, smiled back. "I'm feeling better, thanks to you and the team here," he replied. "But I could sure use a cup of coffee." Sarah chuckled. "I'll see what I can do after we check your vitals, okay?" She quickly and efficiently took his blood pressure, pulse, and temperature, making sure everything was within the normal range. As she worked, she chatted with Mr. Stevens about his recovery and his plans once he was discharged. He was eager to get back home to his garden, something Sarah knew gave him great joy. As she finished up, she noticed a slight grimace on his face. "Are you in any pain, Mr. Stevens?" she asked, concerned. "A little bit," he admitted. "My hip is aching more than usual today." Sarah made a note in his chart and told him she'd speak with the doctor about adjusting his pain medication. "I'll be back in a little while to check on you again," she said before leaving the room. Chapter 4: The Unexpected Challenge. Just as Sarah stepped out of Mr. Stevens' room, her pager beeped. A message flashed across the screen: "Room 305, a patient in distress." Her heart raced as she hurried down the hallway, weaving between other staff and visitors. Room 305 belonged to Mrs. Thompson, a middle-aged woman with a history of heart problems. Sarah had been keeping an eye on her for the past few days, but she hadn't expected anything severe to happen today. When she entered the room, she immediately saw the signs of trouble. Mrs. Thompson was struggling to breathe, her face pale and her chest heaving. Her hands were gripping the bed rails tightly. Sarah quickly moved to the bedside. "It's okay, Mrs. Thompson. I'm here," she said in a calm voice, hoping to soothe the patient while calling for additional help. She grabbed the oxygen mask from the wall and gently placed it over Mrs. Thompson's face, adjusting the flow of oxygen to help her breathe more easily. Within moments, the doctor and another nurse arrived. Together, they worked to stabilize Mrs. Thompson, monitoring her heart rate and checking her vitals. After what felt like hours, but was only a few minutes, Mrs. Thompson's breathing started to return to normal. The color came back to her face, and she looked up at Sarah with a weak but grateful smile. Thank you, she whispered. Sarah gave her hand a gentle squeeze. You're going to be okay, she said softly. Chapter 5: The Emotional Toll. Though the crisis had passed, Sarah felt the weight of the moment linger. It wasn't the first time she had dealt with a life-threatening situation, but every time it happened, it reminded her of just how fragile life could be. As she moved on to her next patient, she couldn't help but think about Mrs. Thompson and the countless others who came through the hospital doors every day. Each patient had their own story, their own fears, and their own struggles. And it was her job to be there for them, not just as a nurse, but as someone they could rely on when they were at their most vulnerable. Sarah checked on her other patients, making sure each one was comfortable and well cared for. She administered medications, adjusted IVs, and helped with daily tasks like eating and moving around. With every patient, she offered a kind word, a reassuring smile, or a moment of conversation to ease their anxiety. It wasn't just about treating their physical ailments, it was about treating them as human beings. Chapter 6: The Power of Teamwork. As the day wore on, Sarah worked closely with the other nurses and doctors. They shared information, consulted on difficult cases, and supported each other through the more challenging moments. The hospital was a team effort, and Sarah knew that without her colleagues, the job would be impossible. During her lunch break, Sarah sat with a few of the other nurses in the staff lounge. They chatted about their day, sharing stories about patients and laughing over small moments of humor that helped break up the tension. It's been a crazy morning, Sarah said, taking a bite of her sandwich. I had to run to Mrs. Thompson's room this morning. She was having trouble breathing. One of the nurses, Jane, nodded. I heard about that. You did a great job stabilizing her. Sarah smiled, feeling a sense of camaraderie. It was a team effort. We all pulled together. They continued talking, but Sarah couldn't help thinking about how much she appreciated her team. In a job like nursing, where the stakes were so high, it was comforting to know that you weren't in it alone. Chapter 7: The Evening Rush. By the late afternoon, the pace of the hospital began to pick up again. More patients were being admitted, and the emergency room was starting to overflow. Sarah could feel the exhaustion creeping in, but there was still work to be done. She spent the next few hours attending to the new patients, each one with their own set of needs and concerns. Some were scared, others were frustrated, and a few were simply grateful to be receiving care. Sarah moved from room to room, her mind focused on the tasks at hand, but her heart always open to the emotional needs of the people she was caring for. One patient, a young boy who had been in a car accident, reminded her of why she became a nurse in the first place. His leg was in a cast, and he was clearly in pain. But when Sarah came in to check on him, he looked up at her with wide, trusting eyes. "Are you going to make me better?" he asked in a small voice. Sarah smiled and knelt down beside his bed. "We're all going to make sure you get better," she said softly. "You're a brave boy, and you're going to be fine in no time." The boy's face lit up with a small smile, and Sarah felt a warmth in her heart. Moments like these made all the hard work worthwhile. She spent a few extra minutes with him, talking about his favorite cartoons and making sure he was as comfortable as possible. Even a small distraction from the pain and fear could make a big difference in a child's recovery. As she left the room, Sarah noticed that the hallway was even busier than before. Doctors and nurses were rushing past, and the air was filled with the sounds of beeping monitors and urgent conversations. She took a deep breath and focused on her next task: administering medications and preparing for the next round of patient care. The evening brought its own set of challenges. The hospital was filled with new admissions, and there were several critical cases that required immediate attention. Sarah worked alongside her team to manage the influx of patients, ensuring that each one received the care they needed. The pace was relentless, and the exhaustion was beginning to take its toll, but the adrenaline and sense of purpose kept her going. Chapter 8: The Late Shift. As night fell, the hospital's atmosphere shifted. The pace slowed a bit, but the work was far from over. Sarah's shift was far from finished, and she knew that the night could bring unexpected challenges. She took a quick break to grab a cup of coffee and a snack, trying to recharge for the final stretch of her shift. She sat in the break room, her mind racing with thoughts of the patients she had seen and the tasks she still needed to complete. The quiet moments were rare, and she took advantage of them to catch her breath and reflect on the day. Despite the stress and the long hours, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Helping people and being there for them during their toughest times was what made the job so rewarding. Returning to her duties, Sarah found herself dealing with a few more emergencies. One of her patients, a woman in her early 30s who had been undergoing treatment for a serious infection, developed a sudden fever. Sarah and the team worked quickly to stabilize her, adjusting her medication and monitoring her condition closely. The situation was tense, but Sarah's experience and calm demeanor helped guide the team through it. As the night wore on, Sarah continued to check on her patients, ensuring that they were comfortable and receiving the care they needed. Each room she entered was filled with its own stories, some hopeful, some heartbreaking. Sarah listened to her patients' concerns, offered words of encouragement, and provided a comforting presence. Chapter 9: Reflections and Resilience. The hours seemed to blur together, and before Sarah knew it, her shift was coming to an end. She felt a mix of relief and fatigue as she prepared to hand over her responsibilities to the incoming night shift nurse. Before leaving, Sarah made sure to review each patient's chart, noting any changes or important information for the next nurse. She checked in with the doctors to discuss any significant updates or concerns. As she walked through the hospital one last time, Sarah took a moment to reflect on the day. The hospital had been a whirlwind of activity, filled with challenges and triumphs. She had seen the best and worst of human experience, and through it all, she had remained committed to her role as a caregiver. Sarah reached the staff room and gathered her belongings. Her uniform was stained with small splatters and smudges, a testament to the busy day she had experienced. She looked around at her fellow nurses and doctors, exchanging tired but satisfied smiles. "Good night, everyone," Sarah said as she prepared to leave. "See you all tomorrow." As she stepped out of the hospital and into the cool night air, Sarah felt a deep sense of gratitude. The day had been long and exhausting, but it had also been filled with moments of connection, compassion, and care. She knew that her work was not just a job, it was a calling, and it was one that she was honored to answer every day. Chapter 10: A New Day. Sarah drove home, the quiet of the night offering a peaceful contrast to the chaos of the hospital. She felt the weight of the day lifting off her shoulders with each passing mile. When she arrived home, she was greeted by the comforting presence of her husband, who had stayed up to wait for her. "How was your day?" he asked, wrapping her in a warm embrace. "It was a tough one," Sarah admitted, "but also really rewarding. We had a lot of emergencies, but we managed to get through it." Her husband listened with understanding, knowing that Sarah often carried the emotional weight of her work with her. They talked about their day, and Sarah found solace in sharing her experiences with someone who cared deeply about her well-being. As she settled into bed, Sarah thought about the patients she had cared for and the impact she had made. She knew that tomorrow would bring a new set of challenges, but she was ready to face them with the same dedication and compassion. With a contented sigh, Sarah closed her eyes, grateful for the chance to make a difference in the lives of others. She knew that her work as a nurse was demanding and sometimes overwhelming, but it was also incredibly fulfilling. Each day was a testament to the strength and resilience of the human spirit, and Sarah was honored to be a part of that journey. As she drifted off to sleep, Sarah looked forward to another day of serving others, knowing that each moment she spent caring for her patients was a step toward making the world a better place.